Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Make Way for Youth podcast. My name is Warindi, and I'm a co-host of this podcast and also a youth panelist at the Make Way program. The Make Way program seeks to advance sexual and reproductive health and rights for all by applying an intersectional lens. In this episode, we will speak about what our reflections from the last year, 2024, are and what our expectations for 2025 are. And before we get into the meat of the podcast or the substance of this podcast today, I'd like to call on my co-hosts, Vilda then Bertha, to just say hi and then we can start the conversation. Vilda.
Hi everyone, my name is Vilda and welcome to this episode. Thank you.
Thank you, Vilda. Bertha?
Hi everyone, it's your girl Bertha again. Happy to have you.
Thank you, ladies. Vilda, I will start with you. So what are your reflections from 2024? It was quite a big year for all of us. So what were yours personally?
Thank you. For me, 2024 was quite a very good year. And I have a lot of reflections, but for the purpose of this session, I'll say that one of the key highlights for me was on the Africa Disability Protocol. So just imagine we got to a point talking about this protocol and looking towards to it in a way that we talk about Africa. And as we are disseminating this information and talking about it, then we got the ratification where already 15 countries had been part of it. So that was one of the key highlights because I see this protocol as something that really resonates with me and something that I look forward to its implementation. And then the second thing that I'll talk about is how within these sessions that we had to talk about the meaningful youth participation and to an extent talking about the leadership part of it. So why young people being given opportunities, young people taking up spaces, and young people speaking up, having their voice to just speak about what they think is right, how they relate with their reproductive health, and how this is so important to them. So those are the two main key highlights.
Thanks for sharing that, Vilda. I would adopt your highlights as mine as well and then contribute that I think I found myself in spaces in the SRHR space where we really did our best to discuss and dissect meaningful youth engagement, especially advocacy for meaningfully engaging young people from a country level, even to a regional level. So I think that puts us at a realization globally that it doesn't work to design programs and interventions to reach young people as beneficiaries, but rather if we rethink how we engage them as partners, then maybe progress can be attained. So that was my highlight. Also, specifically happy for the Zambian civil society organizations that have done a lot of advocacy work involving their lawmakers in parliament and eventually having established institutions like Parliamentary Caucus on Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights, which some of the Make Way organizations really were active in and were able to also present policy briefs. But what I also noticed from last year is that now more than ever, we were so connected in the context of advocacy. Like you could see the disability protocol cutting across the region. Everyone is talking about it. Everyone is advocating locally, regionally, and internationally. So the highlight was really how we were able to merge our efforts together to advocate as a collective and to have a win. So Warindi, what was your highlight for 2024?
All right. I had different highlights, but the biggest for me was obviously launching the Make Way for Youth podcast. It was both a professional and a personal win in a very major way because together the three of us created this amazing platform where young people can come and have open, honest conversations around sexual health and reproductive rights. And also how the podcast was received all around Africa. We even have listeners from Europe and in the US. We have, very many listeners, which is a very, very good thing. And I'm excited to start season 2 as well.
Right, Warindi, it was really exciting and a major professional accomplishment, I think, for all of us. The podcast has become a home where we discuss very sensitive issues, where we get to, even just console each other. I think when you were talking about how we launched the podcast, the conversation that came to mind was the one that we had about young people in Kenya in the midst of the protests and how they were accessing SRHR in such moment. And I realized that the podcast became a home to talk to each other, to share ideas, to even just share frustrations and just update the world on what's going on, with regards to sexual and reproductive health in a setting that seems to be disturbed politically and things are not moving as they should move. So yeah, it was such a highlight.
Yeah, in addition to the podcast, obviously as an advocacy route, I also think we did we are part of quite a couple of regional, national, global advocacy efforts that went really well. The ones that come to mind are obviously the Reproductive Health Network Kenya conference that was held in Mombasa, and the United Nations Civil Society conference held in Nairobi, amongst others. But and also the meeting, the youth meeting and the Mekwe meeting we had earlier in the year. So those kinds of global advocacy opportunities for me, because mostly we work remotely, are like a home, as you talked about the podcast as a home. Those also are a home for myself as an SRHR advocate. Spaces where you go to learn, recharge, and somehow together chat a way forward. I think those were also very profound. So thank you so much, Vilda and Bertha, for sharing your reflections from 2024. I want us now to move to what our expectations of 2025 are, given that already we are seeing so many drawbacks to the SRHR movement or the SRHR space. However, we cannot give up. So I want to hear from you and dream with you about what your expectations of this year are. We can start with you, Vilda.
Thank you once again, Warindi. So for me, I'm quite expecting a lot for the year. Of course, we have the drawbacks, but one of the key things is that first of all, as Makeway program, I'm calling it as an harvest year, where you see after the 5 years implementation, the program is coming to an end. So looking forward to having these success stories from young people, from different people, and just getting to have discussions to see how this was so impactful to different people, me included. So that is one of the things that I foresee as an expectation for this year. So I also ask you that as we're going to have these discussions, please, if you're joining us, keep being with us. And we hope that it's going also to be impactful to you. And then the second thing I look forward is the implementation of the Africa Disability Protocol. Just as I said that it was one of the highlights for me in 2024. So you see, we are having something for the Africa, something that touches directly. And when you talk about autonomy, it really brings out this aspect. So I look forward to, yes, we have the ratification. I look forward to it being implemented, because even within the Makeway, we have been having sessions to just pass around information on what does this entail, and how is it going to help us as people from Africa. As much as we talk about disability, how is sexual reproductive health and right for persons with disability so included in this protocol? So its implementation is going to be one of the key highlights, or something that I expect for the year. And I'm so positive and looking forward to this being implemented at different contexts.
Thank you, Vilda. I actually like your positivity about how you're looking at this year as a harvest year. I think that's very profound for the Milkway program, being that it's run for 5 years now, and also for other SRHR programs that are also winding up this year. Beth, I don't know, how are you feeling about this year? What are your expectations?
Great. Well, the year started quite well, and in the midst of it, as we were just getting started with the year, I was hit by a different kind of anxiety because I felt
Mm-hmm.
like 2024 was such a good year. We started on a good note. We recorded some wins in the sexual reproductive health and rights landscape. And then now came political wheels and global funding mechanisms like the USAID dying down. And this, we also how sexual reproductive health and rights services, among others, came to a halt. Um, so that brought a lot of shivers to me, and I thought so much about the wins that we had attained in the previous years and how that would look like in this year. But of course, in our collective advocacy as the Make Way, we want to see increased access and uptake of services for young people. And there are still things in line that are planned for this year to ensure that that is a reality. But my biggest question is, how do we move from now to sustain the efforts that we have put already? How do we ensure young people continue to access SRHR services? So largely it's anxiety and the questions of really what happens next, you know? How about you, Warindi?
I share your sentiments. I mean, I think the USAID funding cuts, that was very short notice. I don't know if short notice is the right way to put it. It was like it was just and the effects that have happened in Kenya already. We know that like about 40,000 people are going to lose their jobs. There's a program
Mhm.
that's called PEPFAR that mainly deals in AIDS relief and treatment, that whose funding is also going to has been cut, and it will affect millions of people living with HIV and AIDS. And that funding gap will create, or is starting to create, very many challenges in the SRHR space. So I'm very pessimistic around that. I am starting to think about how, as African countries, we can move towards sustainability, because those funding cuts from other governments have exposed us on how we don't have already running systems to manage our own disease burden or our own SRHR our services. And I do think I want to actually urge governments and young people like us, who are the future of this continent, to start thinking about ways that we can sustainably create solutions towards healthcare funding gaps and things like that. Basically, I don't know how you all feel about that.
Right, that's very true. I think that we do definitely need to invest in domestic resource mobilization, and we also need to keep advocating to have policies that really has a human face,
Mm,
because everything that we do really impacts a life somewhere, and we need to really take social impact as such.
yeah.
And even just as we are making, decisions or advocating for certain things to be done a certain way, we should have at least have a mind of that person who is a beneficiary of such social impact interventions.
All right. Thank you so much, Vilda and Bertha, for sharing your reflections of 2024 and your expectations for 2025. I urge all listeners to also, if you haven't already, reflect on what 2024 was for you and then dream about 2025. And thank you so much for listening to this podcast all the way through, and for listening to the other podcasts we've put out. Remember to share, like, comment, and rate this podcast on Spotify. Catch us on our next episode on the following podcast channels on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and you can also catch us on YouTube. Thank you so much, and see you next time. Goodbye.